Clayton Thornhill stood in the grand foyer of his San Antonio mansion, irritation radiating from every inch of his imposing frame. His housekeeper of 15 years had quit without warning, something about wanting to live with her daughter in Austin, and the employment agency had sent a replacement without consulting him first. He didn't like surprises, didn't tolerate inefficiency, and certainly hadn't expected the young woman now standing before him with downcast eyes and worn clothing. She was Apache, that much was immediately obvious. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple braid, her dress plain and mended in several places, her possessions contained in a single small bag. The agency representative, Mr. Peterson, introduced her as Ayanna, recently arrived from a mission school, excellent references, willing to work for standard wages. Clayton barely listened, his mind already calculating how quickly he could find a proper replacement. This girl looked barely 20, far too young and inexperienced for managing a house of this size and complexity. He addressed her directly for the first time, his tone clipped and businesslike. Did she have experience managing a large household? Had she worked for families of quality before? Could she prepare meals to his specific standards? Ayanna answered each question with simple yes or no responses, her voice soft but clear, her eyes never quite meeting his. Her deference should have been appropriate, but something about it irritated Clayton further. She seemed too quiet, too passive, like she was trying to make herself invisible. He didn't trust people who tried to hide themselves. It usually meant they had something to conceal. Clayton laid out his expectations with brutal clarity. His house ran on strict schedules, breakfast at precisely 6 in the morning, dinner at 7 in the evening. His study was private and not to be entered except for cleaning on Thursdays. His business papers were never to be touched or moved. He entertained frequently, politicians, business associates, other ranchers, and those evenings required impeccable service. Could she handle that level of responsibility? Ayanna nodded once, still not meeting his eyes, and said simply, "Yes, sir, I understand." Her calm acceptance frustrated him more than protest would have. Didn't she realize she was being tested, challenged, essentially told she probably wasn't good enough? Mr. Peterson seemed satisfied with the arrangement and left quickly, clearly eager to escape Clayton's famous impatience. Alone with his new housekeeper, Clayton showed her through the house, 12 rooms, 3 floors, modern conveniences that would be foreign to someone from her background. He pointed out the kitchen's complicated coal stove, the formal dining room's expensive china, the library's irreplaceable books. Each explanation carried an unspoken warning: don't break anything, don't disappoint me, don't prove my low expectations correct. Ayanna followed silently, taking in every detail, asking no questions. When they finished the tour in the servants' quarters, a small but comfortable room on the 3rd floor, Clayton asked if she had any concerns. Ayanna looked at him directly for the first time, her dark eyes unreadable, and said, "No, sir, I'll begin immediately." Clayton left feeling unsettled, though he couldn't articulate why. Something about her quiet confidence didn't match his assumptions about who she should be. He pushed the thought aside and returned to his study, already composing an advertisement for a more suitable housekeeper. This arrangement was clearly temporary, and the sooner he found proper help, the better. The first week revealed Clayton's assumptions to be spectacularly wrong, though he refused to acknowledge it. Ayanna ran his household with efficiency that surpassed his previous housekeeper. Meals appeared exactly on time, prepared to specifications he hadn't even articulated. His clothes were laundered, pressed, and organized better than they'd been in years. The house gleamed with a level of cleanliness that made even his critical eye struggle to find fault. And she accomplished all of this while remaining almost invisible, moving through rooms like a ghost, present when needed and absent otherwise. Clayton told himself this didn't change anything. Competent domestic help wasn't the same as being truly capable. Anyone could follow instructions if they tried hard enough. He continued treating her politely distant, speaking to her only when necessary, never engaging in the small courtesies he extended to social equals. When business associates visited for dinner, he introduced her as the help, without using her name. When she served coffee in his study during afternoon meetings, he dismissed her with a wave, as if she were furniture rather than human. Ayanna accepted all of this without visible reaction,
maintaining her quiet dignity, doing her work flawlessly. But small things began bothering Clayton. He noticed she read real books, not cheap novels. When he entered the library one evening, he found one of his volumes of Shakespeare returned to the shelf slightly out of place. It annoyed him that she'd touched his books without permission, but it also puzzled him. What would an Apache woman want with English literature? Another time, he overheard her speaking Spanish with the gardener, her fluency and accent suggesting education rather than casual learning. When a French business contact visited and struggled to communicate, Ayanna quietly translated a phrase, then disappeared before Clayton could question how she knew the language. These observations accumulated like pebbles in his boot, small irritations he couldn't quite ignore. One afternoon, frustrated with a particularly complex business contract, Clayton muttered to himself about circular legal language designed to confuse rather than clarify. From across the room where she was dusting shelves, Ayanna spoke quietly. The subordinate clause contradicts the primary obligation in Section 3. They're hoping you won't notice. Clayton spun around, staring at her. She kept her eyes on her work, continued dusting, but clearly understood both his frustration and the legal problem he'd been wrestling with for an hour. He wanted to ask how she knew, what her education had been, who she really was beneath the servant's dress. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you," and returned to his contract, finding exactly the problem she'd identified. That evening, Clayton sat in his study with whiskey and confusion. His new housekeeper was proving to be far more than he had assumed, and he didn't know what to do with that information. Acknowledging her intelligence meant admitting his initial dismissal had been wrong, perhaps even prejudiced. It meant recognizing that his assumptions about her people, her background, her capabilities were based on stereotypes rather than evidence. Clayton had built his fortune on reading people accurately, on seeing opportunities others missed. But he'd completely misread Ayanna, and that failure bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He drained his glass and decided to pay closer attention, to figure out who this quiet woman really was and why she seemed content to hide considerable talents behind domestic duties. The crisis came during Clayton's most important dinner party of the season. He was hosting 5 of San Antonio's wealthiest ranchers and 3 territorial politicians, negotiating a railroad deal that could make or break the next decade of his business. Everything needed to be perfect: the food, the service, the atmosphere. Clayton had gone over every detail with Ayanna twice, emphasizing that this evening would determine whether she could remain in his employment. She'd listened with her usual calm attention and assured him everything would be managed properly. The dinner started well. Ayanna served each course with quiet precision, anticipating needs before guests could voice them. The food was exceptional, better than Clayton had dared hope. But during the main course, the conversation turned political, then ugly. Senator Whitmore, deep in his cups, began pontificating about the Indian problem and the necessity of reservations. His words grew increasingly harsh, dismissing entire peoples as primitive, backward, incapable of civilization. The other men at the table murmured agreement, adding their own opinions about Apache savagery and natural inferiority. Clayton said nothing, though he noticed Ayanna's hands trembled slightly as she poured wine. Then Judge Hamilton looked directly at Ayanna and made a cruel joke about whether Clayton trusted his Apache help near the silver or if he counted the spoons nightly. The table erupted in laughter. Clayton felt a flash of shame but remained silent, unwilling to embarrass himself by defending hired help in front of these powerful men. Their approval mattered too much to his business. He expected Ayanna to leave the room quietly, to accept the insult as she'd accepted everything else. Instead, she set down the wine bottle with deliberate care, straightened her shoulders, and spoke clear enough for everyone to hear. What followed shocked the room into absolute silence. Ayanna addressed Judge Hamilton directly, her English flawless and formal, her tone respectful but firm. She thanked Judge Hamilton for his concern about Mr. Thornhill's silver and assured him that in her 3 years at the mission school, they'd emphasized the importance of honesty alongside the reading, mathematics, history, literature, French, Spanish, and Latin she'd been taught. She mentioned that her particular favorites were political philosophy and economics, subjects she found endlessly fascinating, given how often people in power made decisions about others without understanding their actual circumstances or capabilities. She'd noted that she'd read the judge's recent published opinion on property rights and found his argument legally sound, though morally questionable, and she'd be happy to discuss the finer points of jurisprudence if he had time after dinner. The silence stretched impossibly long. Judge Hamilton's face had gone purple, though whether from anger or embarrassment, Clayton couldn't tell. Senator Whitmore stared at Ayanna like she'd sprouted wings. Clayton himself felt frozen, unable to process what had just happened. His silent, deferential housekeeper had just intellectually dismantled one of the most powerful men in Texas while maintaining perfect courtesy. She'd revealed an education that rivaled anyone at that table, delivered in a tone that made the judge's cruelty look exactly like what it was, ignorant prejudice from someone who